Hello again. I am back talking about everyone's favorite game, especially right now, Destiny. And it's this is the, so this as you will have already been able to tell by the title, we're talking about a bunch of things in this video or this I guess this podcast recording thing discussion. And basically for I assume if anyone's going to listen to this is going to be people that play Destiny, but for anyone that doesn't play Destiny, things aren't looking too great for Destiny recently. Not too much in the game itself. The game, I think technically the game is like probably the best it's been in at its core, like when it works, kind of thing. And I don't really want to paint this necessarily as a doomsday situation kind of thing, but the community sentiment right now is probably some of the worst it's ever been. I don't know if it's worse than it was when Destiny 2 first came out, like that kind of late 2017 era, but it's certainly getting there if it's not already. And there's many reasons for this. You've got things like, particularly in terms of PvP, a lot of kind of long time false promises or what feel like false promises. Uh, a lot of server instability, a sort of decline in the story's quality, just a general idea of kind of like, the structure feeling weird when it comes to the narrative. People have been discussing a lot about the microtransactions and how it feels like Bungie kind of, and I've thought this for a long time, Bungie do kind of have their hands in many pies in Destiny when it comes to monetization. Um, and yeah, there's quite a bit more, but we'll get into all that in a bit. One thing I want to sort of enforce and sort of preface that none of what I'm saying here is to facilitate further upset or aggression towards Bungie, because I think the one thing that a lot of people, I'm not saying people don't recognize this, but I really believe that like the reason like it's difficult to wear, right? Because a lot of people love this game, and a lot of people can be quite aggressive and angry about the game, but it's because everyone really wants it to do well, basically. And seeing the community in such a sort of a dire state right now really sucks, especially when you've got other games that people are kind of going to. Not that it's a problem people going away from Destiny, but because of the situation surrounding that. It'd be a different case if it was like people are just checking out the games, but it's because people are kind of there's a bit of that, but then it's also being reinforced by a general sort of disappointment with the way that the game is. And it's also not to say Bungie aren't hitting the kind of potential, because in a lot of ways we've had so many great points in Destiny in just the last few years. We've had the Witch Queen campaign, which many people kind of consider to be like the best campaign that Destiny's got. And I would be inclined to agree. I think it is. There's no way no other campaign in Destiny compares to that. And we're also getting way more content per season. And so in a lot of ways, Bungie are actually hitting higher highs than I had even believed possible. I think many other people feel the same way. But at the same time, in many other ways, it kind of feels like many problems that people have are also lingering and have been for quite a long time. And ultimately, actions speak louder than words. And so, while I hope Bungie come out and kind of talk about things and address some of these like pain points that people have been talking about the last few weeks and months, the actions are going to really kind of show if they mean it, and if that stuff's really, if there's a lot of hope still to be had, kind of thing, right now. And to be honest, if Bungie are able to kind of do both of those things, where they're both kind of promising, they're talking about what they're bringing, and they are addressing these concerns. Some of them are concerns that have kind of just recently come up, like microtransactions. Basically, no one has been talking about that properly. Certainly not to this degree in quite a long time. But things like PvP, those are the things that have been being spoken about for a long time, and those are the things that I think not only need reassurance, that we need reassuring that that's going to be addressed, but it then needs to be within a pretty close, within the next few months, really. I think deadline is final shape, really, or if it's not, then it needs to be known that it's definitely coming and that things are definitely worked on, and we need to see like kind of evidence of that. And I don't want to come across as like entitled either, because Bungie don't owe us anything, and we're still getting a lot of great stuff, but there's a lot of things they promised and said about that we haven't yet kind of seen the fruits of yet, and I hope that that's still on the cards. Going back to my point before, Destiny is a really complex game, and I think a lot of us actually probably underestimate the difficulties Bungie probably have developing the game. And admittedly, that's not our problem, kind of thing, especially when they're the ones telling us that they're doing certain things, they're working on PvP, and and then it takes ages for it to kind of show, to manifest in the game. So, yeah, there's a lot of different things. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into each of these topics. The first one I'm going to start off with, I've put here first because I believe this is ultimately the biggest, I don't say the biggest problem with the. It's not so much with the core game, but it's a big problem, and that's to do with the server issues. You know, pretty much every week for the last few months or weeks now, Destiny is suffering some kind of issue, usually to do with servers, whether it's matchmaking having issues, whether it's the servers having to be, emergency maintenance, or people straight, getting kicked from the game. Bungie has because another thing like this doesn't just happen on the weeks; it's typically alongside updates. And one of the ways that Bungie said they were going to address that was they were going to take the servers down for like about pretty much around 2 hours before reset time, before the patch kind of probably goes out and people get to log back in, and that they were hoping that that would allow them to kind of get everything sorted before the patch goes out, and then that would lead to a better experience when it's when you can actually log in. But what it's actually seemed to lead to is that those 1 to 2 hour, or it's about 1.5 to 2 hour downtimes has kind of spiraled into ended up like 4 or 5 hours because they've had to sort of delay the maintenance before the servers come back up. And I think we've had a bit of insight into these things, but we don't really get full insight into every single situation, and it's happening so often that the way we want to know what's going on kind of thing, because it's not a good look and it doesn't feel great, especially when there's already this other pile of things that we're sort of still dealing with. And honestly, this issue hasn't technically really affected me personally, but I've seen it going on, and I've heard a lot of, sort of criticism from everyone else, and I see Bungie help tweets go out all the time about this kind of thing. So, it's not doing too great really in that sense. As I said, these servers working are fundamental to the game. So while there are plenty of other issues that I have and other people have with the game, the servers working is kind of like the baseline of you need to sort this out. And it's weird, right? Because on the flip side, we've had several expansion and season launches in the last couple of years that have been really good. And I don't know if that's because they just have kind of prepared for the sudden surge of players like logging in, but I remember Lightfall, I think I was in within 20, 30 minutes, and I think with Witch Queen, I think it was a bit longer than that, but it wasn't... Loads of people were getting in straight away. It wasn't like, people getting kicked and ages of, like, downtime and lag through that kind of launch. And so, it's strange, but yeah, on a week-to-week, particularly update basis, not looking too good right now. And hopefully it gets sorted soon. And so, from there, I'm going to talk about the next thing, which I believe, while I don't think this is fundamental, it's fundamental to the game, but while I don't believe that this is like my personal biggest issue, I feel like, or the game's biggest issue right now, I feel like it's become that because of how long it's been since it's been given proper attention, and that's PvP. And the reason why I say that it's not like my biggest problem or the biggest problem for the game is because I think something like the story, which I'll get into in a bit, is kind of more central to Destiny. It's probably the through line, the backbone of each season of release and the expansion releases, and that is kind of the guiding thread, or guiding star that's going to kind of lead the game forward. And if that's kind of messing up, while content can be good, the story got really good, and then it's not, and that's kind of the central thing that pulls people into each expansion, But PvP for a long time has been kind of left just not very well attended to, kind of thing. Like it's particularly on the map sides. And to be honest, a lot of people will argue this, but a lot of people will say that PvE is the core of Destiny, and that's a PvE game. And whilst I agree to the idea that PvE is certainly where the main focus of Destiny has and probably will always be, Bungie themselves have come out on several occasions, even just earlier this year, saying that PvP is considered the core pillar, and much like Gambit, it's one of the 3 core modes that they considered like their ritual playlists. And they've said that the last season of this year is going to have a particular focus on those, but obviously we know, based on other things they've told us, in terms of like map releases, we're only getting 1 new map this year. And so I've got a few quotes here just to kind of, explain this. In 2021, Joe Blackburn who's the game director of Destiny 2 right now, had a Road to Witch Queen blog article that was kind of like, that's when they were talking about the Witch Queen being delayed from late 2021 to early 2022. That's when they said they're adding an extra expansion, and they were just a bunch of other things. And one of the things in particular, he said that they were refining their vision for PvP through 2021, and they did a bunch of changes through the year, and they certainly, a lot of things got addressed, like 3 peaking and things like that, and they overhauled trials. But at the core of PvP, Joe Blackburn in this blog says, quote, Like many of you, I am passionate about PvP in Destiny 2, and it's clear that we haven't had a consistent message around these modes. And then he goes on to say, to share their high level vision for the Crucible, which is as follows quote, direct player versus player competition is essential in Destiny as an option to express mastery of your Guardian and showcase the strength of your arsenal against other players, end quote. And then after that, he follows up pretty much just saying that it's a simple vision, but they believe it's crucial to kind of have that in the game for a place that for those players that really crave that aspect. Obviously, that was back in 2021, and obviously they did make several changes. Maps didn't really get much attention that year. Uh, Modes kind of got more of the focus for last year, and so what you could argue that plans change. Earlier this year in February, before Lightfall launched, Joe said that Crucible is one of Destiny's, quote, most evergreen rituals, end quote. And that, quote, player versus player combat is here to stay in Destiny 2, as we think it's one of the most inherently replayable parts of the Destiny experience, end quote. And so, just 4 months ago, or I guess it's more like close to 5 months, I guess we're getting to, it's further reinforcing that they are focused on PvP, and yeah, it's needed, but it's so strange when they say that, and then later they kind of talk a bit more about the map plan for the year, and it just doesn't come across as very like, sure, maybe you're committed to it in a sense, but it doesn't. We're not seeing that kind of thing. And this kind of all started back in 2021 when PvP kind of got a proper kind of more attention, at least in messaging, when Joe kind of was out on Twitter and he was saying that they didn't want to commit to a cadence of maps until they knew they could commit to it, basically. And he did say that it would take some time before the results of that effort were seen in game. And their goal was that they wanted consistency. He says, quote, the team wants you to understand that you will be getting new maps and modes every year, and that the cadence of those coming out feels predictable, end quote. And he refers to like that was being done in parallel with the team looking to fund the far future with the predictable roadmaps of maps in Lightfall and beyond. And so, there's all these laying the groundwork, and then it's reinforced in a blog this year, and it all sounds really good. But what's so strange to me, right? What I was talking about the whole map plan, is that sure, it's cool that they're reinforcing that it's important, but one of the weirdest parts to me is their release of maps. So this is a quote from the Lightfall blog post that was kind of like the state of the game a few weeks or a couple of weeks or whatever, or a week before Lightfall launched. And Joe Blackman says, quote, we're still committed to keeping true to our Crucible maps plan, which means the arrival of Meltdown in Season of the Deep, a brand new Vex network map in Season 22, and the return of Citadel in our last season before the final shape, end quote. But I remember reading that because I was like, well, hang on a minute. You're saying you're committed to that plan, and that's fair enough, but that's only one new map for the entire year, and I think that's incredibly underwhelming. And this is from someone that, like, I barely play PvP. I mean, I go there if I need to, but it's not the thing I constantly return to. Basically, I like collecting stuff in Destiny. I'll do Iron Banner and Trials and whatever else. And occasionally I can get pretty hooked into it and want to test out different weapons and things like that. But generally, it doesn't keep me there because the PvE is more interesting to me. But part of that is also because there's nothing really going on to actually pull me in a lot of the time. And I don't think this is the cadence of maps people expected. And it also, when Joe said this, it wasn't with any kind of like acknowledgement of like, this maybe isn't as consistent as you want, but post final shape, that's what we're going for. There's none of that. And that kind of brings me to like, is it possible that the final shape and beyond is going to have what people want, what everyone's kind of been waiting for, But while that could be true, I think the confidence of many, including myself, honestly, is almost at an all-time low. And so it's difficult to really place the trust or even the faith in Bungie that that's going to happen because we just don't know. And it's taken so long to get to where we are now, and to think, we've had next season starting in late August, we're going to have a second new map, and that's going to be the second of two new maps that we've received, one last year, one this year, since October 2019 when Shadowkeep released. So to have two maps in about 4 years is quite it's underwhelming, right? And I don't quite understand I understood last year, one new map, it didn't seem very good, but I was like, okay, but fair enough, if you're staffing up, it probably takes some time. But it's gonna be 2 years. It's gonna be it's in August, it'll be 2 years since Joe posted those tweets. And again, of course, plans change, but I just don't understand why it feels like it's taking so long. And again, we don't know this. We're not getting told. But when you're telling us in February, uh, while you're saying you're committed to the map plan that you've got for the year, you're not really giving you're not inspiring confidence for the rest of the year. And what's weird is that there was nothing map related for Lightfall. So they reprised a map this season, they're bringing a new map next season, and then they're reprising another map in, I guess December probably, or like late November, December time. But they're Destiny 2 maps. They were already in the game and they were taken out a while back, and they're coming back, and it's cool to see them back, but it's just strange to me that it's taking so long. And again, this is, talking from the point of view of a player who we don't really know exactly what's going on. I'm not trying to say they don't care, but it doesn't come across like they care, and that's the general sentiment, which you don't really want from your player base. And to kind of show how extreme it's gotten, especially when you look at PvP on a whole as a part of the game, as well as dealing with cheaters. A streamer, and I think he publishes on YouTube as well, called Grenada Jake, who's been very focused on PvP. He's stuck with Trials. He does a lot of carries and helps people get to the Lighthouse flawless every time Trials is on. He's stuck with it through basically all of the worst times of PvP, and I know this because I basically I don't to be totally honest, I don't always watch Jake, but I've kind of followed him. I've seen him on, I follow him on Twitch and I see when he's on, and I know how much he stuck to that, and a lot of people in the community know how much he stuck to it, and he's built a lot of his channel around that, and obviously now he's basically said, much like many other people, he's kind of been like, well, enough is enough. He's not, leaving Destiny, he's not exiting Destiny and quitting it, but he's playing other games and other stuff, and that's cool, right? It's cool for him, it's cool for, and hopefully it all works out, but that's what people are having to do. And while I don't think that's bad from like a business point of view for the streamer or the YouTuber, that's how bad it's gotten, that someone who's stuck with it for this long, for years, is now saying, no, this isn't worth it anymore. He's not enjoying it, he's not getting gain off it, and maybe I don't want to say like this is what Bungie want, but it's like we just don't know, right? It's difficult to say. I don't want to be dramatic and everything, but it's it's really just it's difficult to say. And so yeah, a prediction I wanted to make about Final Shape was that we were going to get that kind of consistency of PvP, and we were going to get something like that. But it's difficult to really lean into that sort of theory and prediction because because of how low the confidence is. And so like let's talk about that low confidence right now. I think it sounds kind of dramatic to be like, oh, it's like almost an all-time low confidence in Bungie, because we're not. It's not, everything's not terrible. It's a lot of like heat in the moment, and who knows, after we've seen the Final Shape reveal next month, or sorry, not next month, in 2 months, things might be, we might be feeling better. But I feel like that's going to be different this time a little bit, because for all these years, a lot of us have been stuck with Destiny since Destiny 1 came out in 2014. I didn't technically start playing it properly until 2015. But I was definitely there for like since then, and Destiny 1 was pretty good overall. And Destiny 2 had a really rough launch, particularly towards the end of the year with the Curse of Osiris expansion. And people were not happy. Bungie were, it was a worrying time, and from what we've learned, Bungie nearly shut the game down back in 2017. And I don't think we're not, when it comes to like Bungie in terms of how much money they're making and how many people are consistently playing Destiny, we're not at that point now. But in terms of community sentiment and trust, that's where it feels like we're heading towards, or we nearly are again. And sure, like some people look at anything like, oh, everyone who plays Destiny is always complaining, and I think it's like I said, there are some dramatic things that get said, but ultimately, it's because everyone knows how good the game is, or how good the game can be, and everyone sees it's just brimming with potential. Everyone just wants it to be better. And maybe I can even be dramatic at times. I try and avoid. I try not be, but it's sometimes it's difficult because you never know. Are we being dramatic? And with Bungie having just announced Marathon, that sort of feeling from players and not having the trust is kind of further emphasized, and it's it's there's almost a feeling of helplessness, and that, making it sound more dramatic, but it's because we don't want the drivers to be like, oh, they just want to keep racing, they're going to keep doing Destiny because they want the money or they want to fund Marathon. Like, I'm sure that's part of it, and that makes total sense. Of course, you're a business, of course, all that makes sense. But it's like, I want a future where Marathon comes out and it's an awesome game, but yet I know that Destiny is still going to have like a really solid future at the same time. And so Bungie have got these really, because I want Bungie to be successful, of course I do. But it's like a lot of us are wanting Bungie to be successful because we want Destiny. It doesn't mean we don't want anything else, but it's kind of like Destiny is the core, and Destiny can go so many different places. Even this season, we've got fishing, and it's really basic, but it shows that Destiny can be more about just shooting. It's got a wider world. We've got underwater stuff that again is really basic, and it's just collecting bubbles to keep your oxygen level up. But it's showing that Destiny can evolve, and we're getting that in a season. And people are kind of down on this season. There's some decent criticisms that I sort of agree with on a lot of different aspects, but everyone knows how good the game can be, and I think people aren't giving it enough credit. Same with last year when we got Leviathan as a free roam patrol space. Even though I agree on generally that the season wasn't anything like crazy, it was cool to see Bungie try something else. It wasn't just an activity, it was a patrol zone. And that felt cool because it added to like making the season feel like it was fresh and separate. It felt like a separate part of the game. It wasn't an instance activity you load into, you do, and you exit. It was something you could load into and you could take your time. You could join the public event, and you could, and stuff like that. And again with this season, and we know we're getting a new activity like type next season. There's clearly innovation on some level. I know it's like not crazy, but it's still there. And so clearly there is still a passion going on. Bungie are not just throwing out content and it's all, even though generally, yes, every season is the same, but I don't really know how you're supposed to have this gigantic shift in what a season in Destiny is, because, you can't do that on a season basis. That's something you have to plan ahead for. And I think that they're doing some cool changes that kind of allow us to have a little bit of more nuance in the season to kind of make it feel a little bit different on the whole. But I also understand that, we're not going to have a sudden drastic change in like what a season is. But we did get that, to be fair, back in year 4, between Season of the Hunt, which was, I think, one of the worst seasons, and then we had Season of the Chosen, Splicer, and Lost, which was this kind of almost like a reboot for seasons in a way that was so good because it was such an upswing in the quality and the amount of story we're getting and content, and just really good. So who knows what's possible? Last year we started getting dungeons through the year, and we're continuing that this year. So everyone sees this, right? Everyone sees this with Destiny. Everyone knows that Destiny can be so good. And I think what's worrying is that while they're working on Marathon, we just don't want to kind of, as it already appears that a lot of Bungie devs, particularly from the PvP side, had been moved over to Marathon. We don't want that constantly happening, but we want to know that Destiny is still going to exist and continue and thrive, and Marathon can thrive at the same time. I mean, I'm excited for Marathon. I'm really looking forward to checking it out, but I'll be pretty upset if Destiny kind of gets pushed aside and Marathon becomes like their new big focus. And again, if Marathon's super successful, I mean, will it? Will that happen? Bungie are a huge company, though. We should certainly keep that in mind. They are a huge company. I don't think it's like the end of Destiny. I think that is a lot of conjecture and a lot of, panic and dramatic reactions that really doesn't represent the actual situation very well. But I can totally get where it all comes from. And so it's actually not just PvP that's had a lot of this sort of anger and frustration sort of thrown towards it. It's also right at the core of Destiny, and what I mentioned earlier, the story, the through line that kind of carries between each of these releases, both expansions and seasons. And it's a strange situation because back during year 4, a lot of people remember like Destiny 1 being really like memed heavily upon for its story, the whole thing of like, I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain, and just not having a great story. And obviously there's the sort of story behind that is, from my understanding, is that a lot of it was cut late development and they kind of just shipped it without kind of fixing it. And Destiny 2 has overall been much better. It's not been perfect in a lot of places, but it's definitely been more interesting and better written. But starting in year 4, specifically the second season, the Season of the Chosen, which is, we got that in 2021, the narrative had like a huge increase in quality, quantity, and consistency. And this happened through seasons, and it carried through in Season of the Splicer and Season of the Lost. And personally, I think Season of the Splicer is kind of, I don't want to say the best season content wise, but as a season in terms of flow, pacing, content quality, and just the whole kind of, how it all comes together. I think Season of the Splicer is the definitive Destiny season from like a, because they carried so much of the story, they carried so much of the content, and even if it wasn't perfect, and a lot of people didn't like the seasonal activity, a lot of people will say something like Season of Opulence would be better, but I think that considering the story in particular was a huge, to have a story of such a high quality at the same time while getting that content, and the content was even kind of getting fresh each week with the expunge missions. That was really impressive. And so to me, even if people don't consider it the best, I think it's one of the best, and I think it's definitely up there. It's probably my number one season personally. And all that quality culminated in the Witch Queen, which had the best Destiny campaign to date. Like there's no other campaign that has lived up to that at all. And what's crazy is that campaign felt so impressive to a point that I didn't even anticipate Destiny would get to. I remember them hyping it up at the Witch Queen reveal, but comparing it to like God of War and Doom and and Halo and liking single player campaigns, and I was kind of like, okay, sure. I mean, I'm not saying it would be bad, but I just didn't really anticipate it being on the level of those, and I don't think it's on the level of those necessarily in every avenue. But at the same time, I'd say it's pretty much competing with a lot of FPS like single player shooters and stories, and for Destiny especially, it is far beyond the quality of any other campaign that we've had. And that was truly exciting because not only did we have those 3 seasons that had like a really good story leading up to it that really set it up really well, to have it end or kind of conclude and culminate in such a high quality campaign was kind of just totally unexpected. And as an expansion, though, the campaign, it was just, perfectly paced. It was excellently told and written with just a really well balanced higher difficulty tier and the best level design that Destiny's seen outside of raids and dungeons. And it was just a treat to play through. And I still like think back to that, and I was just like, man, this is it's crazy to think we got something of that high quality. Um, but then on kind of straight after that, not so much the season that released with Witch Queen, because funnily enough, the season that released with Witch Queen I think is arguably the best season that we've gotten with an expansion. Typically those are usually lighter on content, and so was Season of the Risen. So Season of the Risen was also kind of lighter on content, but it had like for the 4 or 5 week story, there was probably one week where it was kind of like nothing really happened, but the other 3 weeks had like an event that happened, like something that actually happened in the story, whether it was huge or not. There was an actual something going on, whether it was a cutscene or something happening just in the story that was interesting. And in year 5, we kind of lost that, like, starting with Season of the Haunted and into Plunder. Not so much with Seraph, because I think Seraph was the best season of that year, but it kind of just felt like the character development took like the center stage for the seasons, and yet back in year 4, character development was on top of like a story that was kind of moving forward. And so we kind of got the best of both worlds in year 4, and year 5 just kind of dropped the ball a little bit, at least as I said, not including Season of the Seraph. So specifically we're focusing on Season of the Haunted and Season of Plunder. And then contrasting to Witch Queen, those seasons, that year 5 seasons, culminated in one of the worst Destiny campaigns today in Lightfall. And to be fair, like, I'm calling it one of the worst, but like conceptually it was a pretty good setup, and it was kind of like playing through it the first time was enjoyable. It just didn't feel like it was hitting the same kind of beats. It felt like there was an undercut of like development, like or like budget. It just didn't feel like it was quite on the same level, like playing through it. But it still emulated a lot of the having legendary difficulty and having kind of the bells and whistles that kind of made up that first that Witch Queen campaign, which was kind of like the new version of a Destiny campaign that we the first time we've gotten something so sort of grand in scale. And Lightfall was kind of hitting some of the beats, but not really consistently. And you finish it, and you kind of reach a point where it feels like nothing really gets explained, and a lot of the stuff in that expansion, in terms of like the setting and the characters, don't really have any connection to the current story, or if they do, it's not that it sort of it doesn't grab your attention kind of thing, and that we're learning about it this season. They're addressing certain things this season, but again, the pacing is slow, and even though we just had like one of the best cutscenes Destiny has probably ever seen that actually kind of explains certain things. uh the whole structure and like planning for how this has all been rolled out for Lightfall has been really weird. Now I think this is because of a larger problem. I don't think this is as simple as Bungie have dropped the ball. I think there's more to this. Now I wrote an article about this, and so I'll link that in the description so you can check that out in more detail. But a lot of the community kind of came to the conclusion fairly quickly after Lightfall came out, that assumed that Lightfall was filler. Now, I don't want to call it filler as a disrespect to the work of the developers on it, because there's still a lot of good stuff. Strand, especially while I don't think Neomuna is anything massively like impressive from a play space, I think it's visually striking and just is something that it is very different from a lot of Destiny. I think the design of Cloud Strides is really cool. I liked Nimbus and Rohan. I thought they were kind of cool characters. I know people don't always like Nimbus or Rohan. I think people didn't really get much of a connection to Rohan, but yeah, I just I don't know. I enjoyed the characters, and I said my first playthrough I did enjoy. I enjoyed it. It didn't feel as good, but I still enjoyed it. And so there's a lot of cool things going on in Lightfall, even if the overall quality is not that great. And but if we were to just assume that's filler, and then there's a few things that we can kind of point out, as I do in the article I'm on about, that I think point towards it being filler. Logically, we can assume that so are 4 seasons. That 4 seasons are also filler. 4 of the seasons that we've either gotten last year or this year are filler as well. And the reason I say this is because Lightfall was originally intended to be the final expansion for this saga, but then they announced that there'll be another release after which we later came to know the name of, it being the final shape, and that would be the sort of the conclusion. And so it would be logical to then assume that the 4 seasons, as you've added another expansion where you've got to fill out that, the 12 months that are going to connect from one expansion to the next. So I just think that's so 4 seasons have been added as a result of Lightfall. And so to my kind of like conclusion that I come to is that they had to find a way to fill the gap not only of the seasons, but to kind of like have the expansion and then have those seasons connect to the next expansion, but without disrupting the final expansion in how they wanted to set it up and play it out. Because I highly doubt the original ending that they had planned just got totally scrapped. They probably just moved it back. But at the same time, they know that people are, they can't just suddenly take a huge sidestep. So they kind of try to do both. They try and take a sidestep at the same time as continue the story. And I think that's why we get something like the Veil introduced, which could have always been a plan. They could have already planned to have the Veil as a sort of device, thrown into the story. But I don't know if it would have been in this particular way. And it's weird considering where they've kind of slotted it in, especially considering they didn't explain it during the expansion, and we were only kind of this season getting a little bit more information on it. I don't think they've been crystal clear on what it is, but I think we have a pretty decent idea of what it is. And the biggest question then, considering the cutscene this week, is why are we learning about the Witness's origins and its intentions with the Veil in this season and not in the expansion we just had, where we encountered both of them directly for the first time? But then if you think, well, if that information was then in Lightfall, then what would we have gotten this season? Like, so you move, and so, and I saw a lot of people speculating that, like, oh, they moved it to this season. I'm like, well, if you literally mean they literally just moved the cutscene, that doesn't make any sense. If you mean they put the information here and chose to do this, then yeah, I think that's maybe what happened. It's weird, but they had to figure out something to make to get people to, well, like, to get find a way to kind of continue that story. Plus, if the next 2 seasons, which going by my prediction, my prediction was that Season of the Deep would have been the proper, like, that would have been the first season that would have kind of kicked off, that would have been one of the other seasons that we were meant to get, rather than a quote-unquote filler season. But I think based on where we're at, maybe this season is a bit of a filler season, and the next two are going to be the actual seasons that were originally planned. But then I do think that my whole thing of like season, my prediction title, as it were, was Season the Deep will realign the narrative, going by the cutscene, and I don't know what we're going to get, on the next reset, which, as of the time of recording, is tomorrow, but this might go up on the same day as reset. We don't really know what else might happen, or even at the end of the season. But I want to say that means the next two seasons are going to be the actual continuation. And my whole thing with this is like, now I'm kind of thinking about it, I almost wonder, it's possible they had too much story for one expansion in 4 seasons, and they didn't want to just add 2 seasons and then have the expansion release, because then that kind of messes up their structure. And they all maybe also wanted a lot of the story beats to stay in the game. But I also can't work out what's in Lightfall that's so important that so it's kind of like I said, it's a really weird situation. The only other guess I can have is that they just wanted to delay Final Shape to have more time to work on it, or to give them more time to work on what comes afterwards. There are really many reasons why they would have done this. I don't like it, but if that's correct, it should mean that narrative-wise, you know, it should be looking up from here, which is good. That's one aspect of the game that's kind of fallen off a little bit, but if we're about to kind of get back on track, I think that's good. But of course, we will have to wait and see, both at the Final Shape reveal event in August, but also the next season that begins on that same day. And it's kind of like, a large part of like why I believe this is I just don't see how Year 4 and Witch Queen could have been so good story wise, and then it just kind of fall off so quickly. It's clearly it was developed with a strong direction. They had planned that story to have like the witness revealed at the end after revealing all those twists about Savathun, and it was so well done that I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how good the campaign was when, to play, the destinations, the place you go to, the level design, the objectives that you get, the kind of puzzles, the boss fights, the combat, the gameplay, the challenge, legendary difficulty, and it's only 8 missions, but yet it's a several hour, I think on legendary difficulty, I think it took me a good 6 or 7 hours, which is, I was shocked, honestly. And then when you finish that and you find all those things out, and then you end with like a post-credits style scene when they reveal the witness, who's teased throughout the campaign, it's just such a good and so well-paced campaign that it really was. I just couldn't believe that that's what I was playing. And then so obviously to have Lightfall be basically the opposite of that, particularly when it's preceding seasons, other than Season of the Seraph, kind of failed to kind of get the hype going, and then Lightfall just doesn't deliver. And yeah, so hopefully the next 2 seasons are going to be the ones narratively that are really going to kind of kick it into gear and get us all kind of excited for what's going to happen in Final Shape, which them having revealed it already alongside Marathon at the PlayStation Showcase last month, I think it was. That was cool to see. Really excited for Cade coming back. I think that's going to be really interesting. But yeah, even though I'm confident in my estimations with all this, there is, again, with that lack of confidence, it is difficult to fully kind of commit to that theory. But I'm hoping for the best. And so just kind of the last topic here that I'm going to talk about that's kind of been rumbling around is microtransactions, and as Dato called it before, Eververse. And obviously this has been sparked by Aztecross made a video, basically, sort of saying is Destiny becoming a microtransaction hell. And it's like a good 30 minutes. Highly recommend watching it. There's a bunch of stuff. It articulates. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but very good points. It's very very nice to see someone talk about it. He was sort of discussing it. He was sort of saying on stream it was going to be coming up, and I was sort of quite and anticipating when it was coming out, and to see it and for it to be as impactful. I mean, it's got over, I think it's 1.1 million views, and it's been watched by a bunch of people, shared around a lot. So to kind of focus on my thoughts on it, I don't like microtransactions really in any game. It's not like I'm against them existing. I'm very like a purist. I'm like, it would be cool if all this was earnable in the game, but it's not obviously the kind of, that's not, it's, I can't really expect that now, and so a lot of it is kind of like I've dealt with it, but especially with Destiny, Bungie are quite, I don't know what to say, but there's a lot of different monetization sort of thing, like, schemes in Destiny. And I'm just kind of glad to see someone, talk about it, because as far as I'm concerned, it's an aspect of the game that I don't think has received anywhere near enough scrutiny over time. And so to be fully transparent, I have purchased silver on the odd occasion, but it's not like I'm like, oh yeah, hell yeah, spending some money on silver. It's just I know that there's no point continuing to like fight against it because it's not going to be worth it. It's anything I say is not going to move the needle, and it's kind of just something I have to deal with. And maybe that's not the right mindset to have, but it's like you know, it's not so much that I have a huge problem with the store, which is kind of more where I've spent money and on the content, but other things like transmog and buying season ranks and some of the other things that Aztecross goes into, those are the things that I'm like, I'm not going to pay for that. Like, why would I want to do that? And so while I might buy silver from time to time, it's not as if it's like, the store is probably one of the things I have the least issue with, because I also just know it's like you have to deal with it anyway. um, and so, and these kind of things, I've been very critical of microtransactions and monetization in games for a long time. And honestly, the time I spent complaining and criticizing these things, it was never worth it. You know, Particularly when the responses I received were usually negative, and people were tended to defend the existence of MTX, more than my critique. And it baffles me really, because I'm like, why are you fighting against what I'm saying? Like, would prefer to pay money over just earning the items in the game normally? Like, that never makes sense to me. I understand people saying, "Oh, this is the reality we're in," and I understand people don't want to necessarily complain, and they don't, that's just not what they want to do, and that's totally fair. But I don't know. I just think it would be cool to earn more stuff in games, because whenever a game does come out that you can just earn everything by playing, everyone praises it, and it's so strange how everyone could like praise that. And yeah, it's weird. As I said, I understand their inclusion, and I'm not really against them. And as I said, it's not like it's something I hate in games. Like, I'm like, oh no, I don't like this. I don't like item shops. I don't really like MTX, but it's kind of like, I I used to. I mean, it was even back in like the old days of like Call of Duty. They had like the sort of cheap packs and stuff like that. I kind of like I bought them from time to time as well, but they were cheap as well. Things aren't as cheap anymore. So it's only really if I really want something that I'd spend money. But that's only because usually it's like either I can't get it by playing the game, which is the case for like a lot of the finishes in Destiny, or like this season they had like the Last of Us Ghost or whatever, which makes a clicker sound when you equip it. Of course, I mean like but that maybe I'm just being a shill there. um, but yeah, as I said, not a huge fan of them. I deal with it, and I'm also quite invested into Destiny, but I can never imagine spending like hundreds of pounds or dollars or whatever on Destiny or in any game. In fact, like at least not all in one go. Maybe over a few years, but I'm very conservative with how much I actually want to spend on silver. But yeah, I don't want to talk too long on this topic, so I'm just going to run through a list that I've written of probably my biggest problems with MTX. Uh, Kind of some of what Aztecross said in his video. Generally, I agree with most of what he says, to be fair. Maybe not all things, but I'll get to that. So first thing, I think a lot of the items in Eververse and bundles are generally pretty overpriced. As is the case with many games, I have no idea why things cost so much. It baffles me, really. Transmog being limited per season and just tied to MTX is really stupid, and at this point, it needs to go. Especially when you've got a game like, I remember Outriders suddenly came out with free transmog, and Diablo's just come out, has free transmog. I'm like, stop it, Bungie, like, take the limit away. Just take it away. There's no need. You have to grind in the first, but you have to put time in, like, just please. Take it away. I mean, even, in other games, just earn the armor piece and you can dismantle it and you get the look. I'm not saying Destiny has to do that. I'm not against some kind of grind towards it, but having it tied to MTX and being limited for what you can earn, no, it needs to go. This next one, I don't think Aztecross mentioned. Bright engrams, they need duplicate prediction at minimum. You shouldn't get the same item twice. There are probably thousands of items in that now. We were told, I mean, unless I'm misremembering the specific wording, which, as with any MTX stuff, there's very specific wording used, but I'm sure we were told that all items from every season, 3 seasons before the current season, so e.g., I mean, what season are we in now? We're 2022, I think. We're season 22, I think. That's correct. But even if we're not, just assume it's season 22. 3 seasons ago would have been season 19, and basically every season before that is all those items before that were in the store or whatever that were in seasons 1 to 18 or 1 to 19 or whatever. That's all of what's in the Bright Engram that you can get. But there's no duplicate protection, and the armor is not in there for some reason, which I just think that's ridiculous. Add duplicate protection, especially when you can only earn them every 5 season ranks, and that's another point that I wish would change. I almost think every 2 ranks would be much better. No, it's no need to, like, especially when you're bloating the engrams so much. There's no need to hold people back. And hey, if you collect everything, then you can just keep grinding it out, and you can just everything you get after that point just turns into bright dust, or make it so you can dismantle items again and get bright dust. Another weird change they made. Bright dust, speaking of, I think should be more easily earnable. People will fight against this because they'll say, "Oh, you can grind out a lot." It's like, yes, but we used to get more. They limited the amount we could get. Again, the only reason why they've done that is to push us more to spending money. So, Bright Dust, you should be able to earn more of them. I think the Season Pass price increase was fine, honestly, but the silver bundles probably should be adjusted in value. Or adjusted in how much silver you get, because there's no need to get people to buy 2 different bundles or get people to spend more. Obviously, we know why it's done, but, kind of shitty. I also think this is one thing that Aztecross doesn't mention, and I don't know if many people actually realize this, but seasons should always be able to be purchased individually. Currently, if you don't buy the deluxe edition of an expansion, say if the first season is gone, so say if you are new right now and you jump in and you want to play this season and you buy it on its own, and you're like, oh, cool, I want to play last season's content. You can't buy last season on its own. You have to buy the deluxe edition of the expansion. If you already own Lightfall, you can just upgrade to the deluxe. But if you don't own Lightfall, not only do you have to buy Lightfall, you then have to buy the deluxe as well. So you basically have to buy a game's worth just so you have access to the previous season. And then you're locked in for the future 2 seasons as well. This has been a thing as long as they've done this. I think this is probably a thing back in year 3, maybe, if not year 4 was definitely when it happened. I think year 4 was when I realised that was a thing. But yeah, that should be changed. No need to do that. Again, obviously know why, but it's just, especially when you've got so many things to buy. And speaking of, I think the price of the current expansion and deluxe editions are totally fine, but all the content, specifically Forsaken and Shadowkeep, and maybe even Beyond Light, at least for Stasis, should be made free. Dungeon keys are a weird thing. I don't hate them necessarily, but they do add to the confusion, and they cost a lot, since you have to buy essentially 2 dungeons worth, even if you just want to play one of them. So I'm not really too sure what's the play here. Maybe you can just unlock dungeon access if you're in the current season, or the season in which a dungeon is released, and just go by that. But it's adding so many layers to this already, and there's already too many layers. And yeah, the next one, I'm actually surprised so many people are against this next one, because I feel like this one almost works in the player's favor a little bit, to some degree. But obviously, as with probably many games, events are very heavily monetized. They are quote-unquote free events, but yet they have a bunch of new cosmetics that you can buy from the store. And Bungie did something. They had something called an event pass, where you could basically buy it. It's almost like a mini battle pass for the event, for the 3-week event, and you would be able to get cosmetics from that that Bungie said would otherwise have been in Eververse. So going by that, even though you could argue that they make the same number of cosmetics and then they just put an extra few inside the event pass, I don't hate this, primarily for the fact because you can get what would usually cost more. You can pay something and it rewards you more for actually playing the game, which I'm kind of not really against, because I wish there was more for playing the game. That said, I wouldn't complain if they were gone in terms of the price. So, like, the best solution here is just make them free. You've already got a store full of items. Why do you need to charge for the event pass as well? So, from that regard, I think they're bad. But if we were to take Bungie's word for what they were doing, I don't think they're that bad. But not going to complain about something not being paid, you know. Now, Aztecross makes a bit of a focus on being able to buy season ranks, and that being pay to win because you can get in-game resources, particularly the whatever the currency I've forgotten, the Deep Sight Harmonizer, for getting crafted weapons. I'm pretty sure Bungie said that was kind of a test, and they were putting them there, you know, to limit the amount you could get. Yeah, it's kind of weird because it's like, well, why do you need to limit the amount we can get? Or sorry, not so much if you can limit them, but why do you need to put it in there to limit how many we can get? You know, I almost think that they could have just given us them through, you know, I don't know what source, but there's many reward sources in Destiny. You know, you could just say you can earn 2 every month or something, and maybe that wouldn't be great either but like, putting them in the past, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't against this, I didn't hate this, but like, I doubt this is going to be the forever source. I wouldn't be surprised if next season, if they're going to continue using this currency, that they won't include it in the pass. So I think this is a bit of a one-off. I don't really think this is some kind of like thing to worry about. But it does feel kind of slowly like it's heading towards pay to win. It kind of, I think Aztecross makes a fairly solid case for why it is sort of pay to win. I don't know if I fully agree or feel like that, but I think it's a fair point. It's still paying for something that is sort of power to some extent, but I don't really know if I hate it. I'm not really, you know, it's not, when you're in Destiny and you're playing it, like, I don't think that's an egregious thing. Plus, it's the only place you can get them at the moment. You know, arguably the more egregious thing is buying season ranks, but, you know, most games let you buy tiers on the battle pass. I've always thought that's a pretty frustrating thing. I like that Halo lets you keep all your battle passes regardless of what seasons you're playing in. So, you know, I don't really know what the play is here, but I don't think this is too bad. I could probably talk more about this kind of thing, but I've already probably spoken long enough. I don't think my list is particularly egregious. I think a lot of what I've said here you could change, and it would still keep the core of MTX, and you would still make basically the same amount of money. I actually don't even know if it would affect much. I think people would be happy. But generally, this is a topic that I can't really be bothered to talk about most of the time, because much like Datto said in the past, Eververse is non-negotiable, and again, it's very much is the Foreververse, as he says. So yeah, to wrap all this up a bit, I wasn't going to make this video, or this podcast, wasn't going to talk about this, because I just didn't really think, yeah, I've been playing other stuff myself, I've been enjoying jumping in with Destiny, just playing the story each week, and, you know, it was only that the server's suddenly going down again, I was like, man, this is really getting really bad, and it keeps happening, you know, and I don't know why. And I'm like many people, you know, a lot of people are leaving as well and playing other games, even if it's temporarily, the sentiment is not great right now, and it's kind of like, I don't know, I probably won't matter if I talk about it, but I thought, well, I wanted to talk about it because it has been bothering me, I've wanted to talk about it. I've just kind of put it off because I was just like, you know, maybe, you know, this is just going to keep going on, but just recently things have been kind of spinning up a little bit more. And I think this is probably the worst time it could have happened, at least in recent memory, when we've just got Diablo 4 released, and I know people will disagree with this, but Diablo will rival Destiny. They're both live service looter games. Most, I believe, will return to Destiny because of the gunplay, the abilities in the world, and the story, and there's a lot of things that I think Destiny will probably kind of tower over Diablo in. But no doubt, Diablo's taking away right now in terms of people's time, and depending on how it goes, it could apply for the future too, and not that that's a problem. People playing different games, that's cool, but that's the best way that message can be sent. And whether people stay away permanently or not, I'm sure some probably will. But honestly, I'm glad that there's competition right now. But at the same time, I'm frustrated because I want it to be where Diablo and Destiny will rival each other in their best state, whereas Destiny currently is, you know, while the game itself might, at its core, be arguably the best it's been, even if you kind of, you know, just on the whole, well, I don't know. I think it's the best in terms of like all the features and the content and the quality. Generally, I think is the best, but at the same time, a lot of areas of the game don't get the attention they deserve, and community sentiment is reaching the lowest levels it's ever been, and so it can, like I said, the level of confidence right now is quite low, and I think Bungie needs to come out, you know, swinging whenever they reveal final shape, or even before then. But what's funny is outside of that kind of loot and sort of deep RPG aspect, Destiny is really the only game of its kind, you know. Particularly in the amount of content it's producing every 3 months with a yearly expansion, and it's the best feeling FPS on the market. You know, in this world that is sci-fi and fantasy and all over the place, it has so much potential, right? And I don't think it's a game Bungie or even the industry can afford to lose, really, because it's kind of the only game of its kind. And every game that's attempted to try and do Destiny in some form has not gone very well. And I think Destiny will probably always have the upper hand, and that's great in to an extent. But when there's so many issues and yet nothing is kind of rivaling it and pushing it to really kind of evolve and fight back, you know, that could lead to this kind of complacency or at least what feels like complacency. But the thing is, I know that there's so many people at Bungie that care about this game. It's weird because it's like, it doesn't feel like we're not seeing all of that right now, but it's like, but we see it in the Vidocs, we see it all the time. Like, Bungie are always like hyping things up, but it's not hype just for us. It's like, it feels like they are fully invested into it. And so, much like this entire video, I don't want it to come across as like this is a, you know, a Bungie don't care, because I'm sure they do, but there's certain areas of the game where, no doubt, deserve way more attention than they should have gotten, especially when Bungie keep reiterating that they care so much about it, and then they don't seem to show that, at least as we understand it, kind of thing. And we usually go through periods like this every year, but this bomb feels particularly bad, and the fact that we're not even properly halfway through this year of Destiny content, and people are already like this is usually a third, you know, it starts brewing in the second season, and then the third, and sort of into the fourth season, it kind of carries on, but generally it's not too bad. The fact that we're starting and it's this negative in the second season, and we're not even halfway through the second season, it's something needs to change, something needs to be said, something needs to be done. Um, and we know that Bungie are going to come out with a great showcase at the end of August. You know, they are absolute masters of hype. But I will say, whilst that'll no doubt be true, I'm sure, with this growing list of concerns, there's a lot of things to be addressed. And I think people are waiting for news on those topics, and they want to have something to be excited for. And if they're not spoken about, I think this confidence is going to wane further. And I think this is going to be interesting to see play out. It's also going to be frustrating because I want to root for Destiny, and I want people to be excited about Destiny. But, you know, there's so much potential, as I said before, about this game that I don't want to see that squandered. And yeah, so I don't want to be too negative, but it's been a bit rough recently with Destiny. It's a bit of a shame. I'm disappointed, but I'm hoping. I'm hopeful, but I think even myself, who has kind of been generally optimistic about Destiny every year, even I'm feeling this a little bit, where it's like it's getting a bit much, and I really hope that that's like where that's all we're about. That's kind of the worst it's gonna get, and soon we're gonna see a future that's way brighter than we kind of could have thought, and you know, we'll see. It's difficult to say right now, obviously. Who knows if Bungie will suddenly come and say something this week. I'll be honest, I think they need to acknowledge something about the servers at minimum, because the servers going down as much is a problem. And as I said, even if it doesn't affect me directly because I've been playing less, you need the servers for the game to be playable. And if you can't play the game in the first place, it's not a great look, and it's and it just adds to Destiny's history of looking bad in a lot of ways, and being memed upon. And I certainly have gotten a bit of that from people in the past. So I know, I know that playing Destiny is not something that is. If people don't go, oh, that's awesome, you play Destiny. Typically, people, it's like, oh, you play Destiny, oh, and then ensue the jokes. But yeah, that's all for now. I think. As I said, we'll see where things go. I'm hopeful. I am a little bit I'm optimistic in a lot of ways, but I think this is the least optimistic I've been about Destiny's future ever, honestly. And even back in Curse of Osiris, things weren't great, but I was still held out hope, and I think that paid off back then. But right now, it's looking a bit weird. As I said, still really like Destiny. Still think, I have a lot of respect for Bungie, and I think they're a great company. uh, just as a company and the people that work there, and it's always great to see what they're working on. I just hope that this is kind of like a low point, that they're about to come out with like an even higher high kind of thing. And they did kind of do that with Witch Queen in terms of the campaign. I'm hoping the campaign of Final Shape is going to be on that level, and we are apparently, I think, getting a bit of a tease about what's coming further out beyond Final Shape. Like I assume the year afterwards, and so we'll see how it goes. Hopefully, I keep saying hopefully. There's a lot of hopefullys, and it's always hopefully with Destiny. It's always a hope, you know. It's so funny when you think about the Paul McCartney song that he did, the Hope for the Future. The song Hope for the Future just like carries through Destiny all the time. It's always hoping for the future. This is just how it is for Destiny. This is the usual cycle. But yeah, I'm hopeful. We'll see. But in the meantime, I'm enjoying what else I'm playing. A lot of games I've been playing recently. I've been really into Hitman lately. Uh, Played a bit of Diablo, and he's played Final Fantasy 16. That's kind of next. That's the main thing I want to play. But I've played a lot recently, and it's been cool. Honestly, I've been enjoying just jumping in Destiny, doing the story, hour a week, jumping off. You know, it's been cool. So I'm gonna wrap this up here. Didn't anticipate this being as long. I knew it would be fairly long, but probably not as long as this. So well, I think this is about an hour. I've actually had to record this in 2 parts, so this is like the second part of it. Um, and yeah, hope you've enjoyed listening. This is a State of Destiny podcast, basically. Maybe I could create a series out of it. I don't think I want to commit to a series of like talking about the State of Destiny, honestly, but you know, maybe this is the first of kind of many. So we'll see. I mean, I've thought about doing a podcast style thing like this actually. So I mean, this could be that. It's like how I'm just totally rambling now. It works, honestly, and that's how I've done for this entire video. So that's been the focus of this episode, I suppose. If this is a series, who knows? But yeah, thanks for listening. Let me know what you think of if you play Destiny. If you like these people, I mean, this is probably what my channel is basically going to be. Is a lot of rambling, but kind of with a focus. In a podcast style. It's not really a video you sort of watch. It's mostly just put on the background and listen to, and that's kind of what this is going to have been. I just think that maybe it's a bit too long. But we'll see. So anyway, I'm gonna leave that there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next time whenever I next talk about. So have a good one, and ciao ciao ciao.